ready. Okay. All right. I guess we're good to go.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. Let's start by having you just say your name and spell it for us.
Right. C.J. Mitchell, and actually there's a junior on the end, and that's C.J. No periods. It's initials only. M-I-T-C-H-E-L-L, and then of course Junior J.R.
All right, thank you. And my name's Robert Bauman, and today's date is October 30th of 2013.
It's my mom's birthday.
Is it really?
Yes.
Hey. And we're conducting this interview on the campus of Washington State University Tri-Cities. So, CJ, if we could start by just having you talk about when you first came to Hanford, what brought you here?
Well, I came October 3, 1947. And I was 16 years old at the time. And in the early years, in 1943, my relatives, primarily my uncles and also my father-in-law and others from my community down in northeast Texas, came to work on the Manhattan Project. And of course, I came here in 47, and that's the start of the Cold War. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do you know how your relatives heard about Hanford?
Yes, they actually, and I was a young kid, I guess, at that time, but anyway, I remember people coming through the community and talking about and trying to identify people to come out here to Hanford. And they actually was putting a number, they gave them a number. And when they got to Pasco, they matched up that number. And then when they got there, they found out it was another 40 miles out to Hanford.
Was that DuPont then who had sent people from?
I would think it was DuPont during that time.
Okay.
I'm not sure because I was young. I don't remember exactly what it was. Yeah.
And so you arrived here, as you said, 1947 as
Yes.
a 16-year-old. What were your first sort of impressions of the place?
Well, actually, it was really interesting because when I first came, and I got here at nighttime, which most people will tell you that. But anyway, I came into Pasco, and there was 5 of us. I had 2 first cousins, myself. I had 2 first cousins, myself, and then 2 other people from my community. And we didn't actually come out here the first day. We went to East Pasco because my relatives lived there, and we slept in a little tent about maybe 5. It wasn't even 5 feet. My one uncle had a trailer on one side. The other one had a trailer on the other side with a little, I would say it's a little porch in between. And of course, our tent was just out at maybe 20 feet away, out in the yard. And that's where we slept at night.
Wow.
We visited during the day and then crawled in there at night and slept.
How long did you sleep there?
We were there for about 3 months because when I first came, I got a job working at right up over the hill here, up on the trailer park, right up on North Richland, right here on the east side of George Washington Way. But they didn't have the barracks ready at that time, so we would catch a bus in the morning and ride out here until they got the barracks ready. And my first job was working up and for every trailer they had a wash house. There was no indoor plumbing, so all the homes had a wash house where they did their laundry and when they went to the bathroom. And so that was my job, helping complete those.
Oh, okay. So you lived in East Pasco.
Just for a couple of months, and then we were able to move into the barracks when they got the barracks finished.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And that experience was that, it was only $1.40 a week to live there, and that included daily maid service and clean linen once a week. And so that was pretty good. And at the mess hall, for lunches, when we go to work for our lunch, we could get a lunch box for 50 cents. And that included a couple of sandwiches, maybe orange and apple, maybe a slice of pie or something. Yeah.
And what are the working hours? What sort of hours?
Well, actually, we worked 8 to 10 hours a day and then a half day on Saturday.
Okay.
And so I think it's making like $1.30 an hour. And I think like $65 a week was big money, because back in East Texas I could make like $25, $30 a week. And I work in a sawmill, a little portable sawmill. Yeah. where they made cross ties, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, interesting work.
Now, what was the town in East Texas?
It was a little place called Kildare, Kildare.
Okay.
All it was there was maybe like 4 little businesses and a train station, and just a crossroad, dirt roads, no pavements. Oh, everybody walked.
And so, when you came in '47, what was the racial situation here? Were things
Well, they had
segregated?
discrimination. You couldn't eat there in the bus station in Pasco, and everybody lived on the east side. I think there's a few people lived there, maybe on just the east, just west of the underpath and up on First or Second Street, right in there. Yeah, it was. Of course, I was, I didn't get involved because I was working, but that was what the situation is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did that surprise you at all, or that sort of segregation?
Not coming from East Texas, because I grew up in a segregated world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that wasn't a surprise to me.
And was the workplace segregated also? When you moved up to live here as well?
Well, yeah, I actually had the crews was segregated. The labor, and mostly general labor. That's what I knew about. It was general labor. So yeah, they were. But I think me being the young guy, they put me over with the plumbers, and what I was actually doing, well, they put the joints together.
Mm-hmm.
They did soldering in those days, and you had they called bell holes where you have room to work around those and put those together.
Mm-hmm.
That was my job, to dig those bell holes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so, how long did you do that work? How long?
Well, I did that work about 3 months, because what happened, I came in October, and I got homesick. And if you've never been homesick, you don't know what I'm talking about. It's really. And then at the end of, I think in January, I went back home. I went back to Texas for, I'd here for like 3 months, and man, I was so homesick, I went back. And then I came back in the spring of 1948, right about the time they had the big flood. Yeah, and then after that, when I came back then, and I also lived in the barracks at that time, but I helped build the ranch houses there in Richland.
Okay.
I built those ranch houses there. And also, I also worked on the 100H reactor, helping build a 100H reactor during that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, what brought you back in '48? Was it the opportunity
Well,
for work?
just to work, knowing the work and the pay. Yeah, yeah. It's just that, well, I had to get over the homesickness. I went back and came back because I knew the work was here, and that's what I did. And then I stayed until after the big cold winter of 1949 and 50. And then, and that maybe like February, March, somewhere in there, it was 3 of us. We pulled a single-wide trailer from North Richland to San Francisco, because one of the guys had a sister living there. And then as we were going to California, pulling this trailer, we got down around Williams, California, in Northern California there, and somebody wanted us to know if we wanted to stop and pick cherry blossoms. I never thought, you never heard of a job picking cherry blossoms. And so then we didn't pick cherry blossoms. We went on into San Francisco, and we didn't get any work there right away. And one of the men and myself, we went back to Texas, and then the other gentleman, he went into the military.
Okay.
Yeah. And then that's when I got back there in 1950. That's when my wife was my high school sweetheart. I married her, and we went to Chicago for the next 15 months. And then I came back to the Tri-Cities in 1951.
Okay.
And then I worked on McNairy Dam, moved out to Hermiston, Oregon, and worked the construction there. And then in the spring of 1952, I came back to Pasco, worked on the Blue Bridge, helped that, and the construction on the irrigation canal, the irrigation project coming down through the basin.
Sure.
Yeah, that was my job in Remember when I came back in 1951, and then after that, then I worked and helped build 100 Ks, the 100 K East and West. I worked on that, and then I worked and helped build a Purex facility in 200 East area. And then in the spring of 1955, I went to work for General Electric. That was in the fuel preps department in the 300 area.
1955.
1955.
Okay.
And that's when I was working there, and that's when I got out of construction.
Okay.
And then when I got into the fuel preps area, Well, they had locker rooms and showers and lunch rooms. And at the work area, we had a break. I never heard of a break before. So, and so my job was to, on the production line was to take two fuel elements and put them in a basket, and they would go down in some aluminum alcide. And when they come out, another person would take those two and take them over what we call can and get them canned. Take them over, get canned, and take them to the quench tanks cooling area. And I did that. Now in the locker rooms, there was a bulletin board, and on this bulletin board, that's where all the job postings were, and those were gotten by seniority. And I noticed that every Monday morning was when you selected, and I noticed nobody ever turned those jobs down. So I said, it's got to be something out there better than what I'm doing over here. And then I started thinking, well, you better get something between the ears. You better, I didn't go to college in those days. And by that time, I had a wife and 3 children. That's when I decided, well, I better get going. So I embarked upon a night school program. I went to night school for 14 years.
Wow.
I didn't know if I'd ever get a degree or not. But one of the guys I played basketball, just pick up basketball. And one of the guys that was an engineer out there, he played some basketball. And he said, well, one of the things, you can always have, math and chemistry. So I didn't know if I'd get a degree or not. So I studied math and chemistry. And through that, I was able to work my way out of that out as a technician and later on in the human resources. And I just started that program and I stayed with it 14 years. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So I want to go back a little bit to when you're talking about
Sure.
working fuels prep.
Sure.
Did you have to wear special equipment to do
Yeah.
the job you were doing?
Yeah, you had to have coveralls. You had to have special coveralls to wear that and shoe covers.
Mm-hmm.
You had to wear those, yeah.
That was protect you for anything splashing?
Yeah, you had protection, yeah. And you had to wear, of course, safety goggles. You had to wear those.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you said that was with GE.
Yeah, that was General Electric.
General Electric.
Yes.
And so how long did you work that?
I worked General Electric until 1964, and not that particular job.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did as a result of going to school, well, I did several jobs there, and one of the jobs that I had there was I worked as a person that drove a forklift, could unload fuel elements and help the guys put them on the truck to take to the reactors once they had gotten what we call canned.
Mm-hmm.
And also we had a couple little warehouses where we stored things, and we would have certain fuel elements in there, just bare uranium elements there. And also during that time they started what was they called the big extrusion press for the fuel elements to go to the end reactor when they were going to build an end reactor. Mm-hmm. So I hauled the first fuel elements that they were billets to be put through an extrusion press for the end reactor, and they did that in the 306 building. Interesting work.
Yeah.
And I had gone to probably 15 interviews before I even got a job. And on my 16th interview, I came in on a swing shift, and my boss says they would like to interview you over in the 327 building. And of course, out of courtesy, I went there. And I didn't expect to get anything because that was pretty disappointing that many times, and nothing. And so once I got over there and talked to the gentleman over there, and I got back to my workstation, and about an hour later he came back and he said, well, you're going to have that job over there. And when I went over to get the job I was working in was a bargaining unit job, a union job. Mm-hmm. And they had like 3 classifications. They had a C, B, and an A. 1-2-1 was the ratio. And when they hired, you moved up. If they laid off, you moved down. So I was a C operator. And I'm caught in the sling here. So when it got a chance to go over to the 327 building, I had to give up my seniority there. And I took a $17 a week pay cut to take that job and take a chance on it, and they could have laid me off the next day. But I took that job, and really I've never looked back since. Turned out to be a great move for me.
Yeah. And so how much longer did you work at Hanford then? How long did you work there then?
Well, I worked there at, well, in fact, I worked, in when I got over into the radiometallurgical part, where they're doing examination of radioactive fuels, studying why they had ruptured in the reactors and dissolving samples, for research, things like that. And then I worked for a gentleman I worked for a gentleman named Mike McCormick, who was really a legislator in this area. And he was a chemical engineer by profession. And he had designed some of the casts that they transported elements in. Well, they had a situation where they wanted to bring in a swing shift. And they talked about that, and the meeting says, and if any of you folks are going to school or want to go to school, then we don't have to go identify other people that has to come and go and shift. My hand went up. It was the only hand went up. And then the next week, they decided they weren't going to have that shift. But since my hand went up, and they set up a special shift for me to go to school, and that gave me a chance to make some extra time at Columbia Basin College. And I worked a swing shift, and then Mike McCormick, being a chemist, well, I would come in early on swing shift, and he would teach me. He taught chemistry with me during that time. Actually, one of the best jobs I ever had was in that group. Even though moved up, to human resources and all that was great, and but at least just the whole environment there was one of my special places during my career. And then when I got into human resources, that was when the civil rights movement started. Well, also, just prior to that, there was a job in the 325 building doing some research on we were studying what happened out in space capsules. They were space. There were certain parts of the capsule would freeze up, and so they developed these uranium oxide pellets, to place in there so it would take care of that situation. And I was able to go over to the 325 and work one-on-one with the guy that was doing that research. So I had to do that. And the way I got that job, I had more math and chemistry than anybody in the lab that didn't have a degree at that time. And so I got selected for that. And then just by my going to school and my other community work, when the civil rights movement started, I got an opportunity to go into human resources. And then I ended up getting a degree in business. And so I'm half technical, half business.
There you go.
So it turned out a great career for me.
And how long did you work in human resources then?
I think the last 28 years I was there in human resources. Did a lot of hiring of those, like I said, a lot of hiring of those science and engineers, orientation of new staff, or putting in 401k programs. Did a lot of things.
And which contractors?
That was General Electric until Battelle came in, 1965. Battelle came in. I worked for them.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back a little bit. First, when you initially came back in '47 as a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
And you said you were living in a tent.
Yeah.
Right. What was that like? What was the East Pasco like at the time?
Well, there was no indoor plumbing over there. The streets were all dirt. Yeah, it was pretty. It wasn't very good. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was kind of like back in East Texas, because we just had dirt roads, had no pavements or anything then. Did a lot of walking, and so it was like that there. Yeah, looking back on that.
Then you moved to the dorms, right?
Then we moved out here to dorms, and that was an experience, because I'm 16 years old, and these guys, I never heard swearing and things like I had heard in that. I know my head was going like this all the time, because I'm telling you, these guys were something else. And on Sundays, I would try to get some kind of a ride back into East Pasco, where my uncle and his wife lived, and then that would get me away from that. And then there was some other people that we knew from there, and so we would go there too. So, and I'd ride over with them and come back.
And then you mentioned you had gone back to East Texas, and you and your wife got married.
Sure.
And then you went to Chicago.
Went to Chicago for a couple of summers.
Why did you go to Chicago?
Well, I had a brother had lived there. He'd been in the military, and he lived there in Chicago. And I had stopped there during the time when I first came to Washington. And the way I got there, I knew where he was. And when we left home, I don't know, I did some things that maybe were kind of silly when I was growing up. But in Texarkana, we were all getting ready to come to Washington, and I got off the train and I went. They used to have these phone booths where you have where you can go and have your photo taken. And so when I got back on the train, and on my way to come through St. Louis, coming to St. Louis, and that way you came around St. Louis, Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then around the northern part here. Well, I lost all my, I don't know, I lost my billfold or something in there. And so my one uncle gave me money, and I got off the train in Chicago, I had my ticket, and I went and stayed with my brother. And stayed with him for about a month. And then I went back to Texas doing, I worked at a place called, it was a punch board factory. You made punch boards. The old bars, used to have where you go and punch board and punch in punch boards. Well, they were making punch boards down on Michigan Avenue. Well, I got enough money to get back to Texas and maybe work a little bit, work a few more weeks and get some more money to come back. And so I got off the train in Chicago because I lost my billfold. And then I worked there for 3 or 4 weeks, got enough to get back home, and then came back again. Yeah. And then in the summer of '48, when I was coming back, and coming back to start working on a ranch house, well, in Billings, Montana, I got off the train to get a newspaper. So I got back, looked out, and the train's gone, leaving. So I ran the train down, caught the train. So just about time getting on track, you guy, yeah, well, if you can't make it, you can go home with me. So I caught the back train, worked my way up through all the cars, and then finally the guys on the plane, I said, God, what's wrong with this kid? I'm sure they said, that's the craziest kid I've ever seen. But anyway, because my jacket was there, my coat was there with my ticket and everything in it, but I caught up. But then, of course, I learned. But that's what happened. Then I came back, yeah. But then going to Chicago was, I played baseball. We didn't have baseball in school, but I played with the men teams back in Texas, and I love baseball. And when we got married and went to Chicago, well, then I knew there's always jobs in Chicago. Whether you like the job or not, there's jobs there. So we went there, and we stayed there. And the oldest son was born there, and I would go out to Northwestern University out at Evanston and try out for baseball and that. And I was pretty good at it. I could hit and I could run. My arm, I couldn't throw very well. I could hit and I could run. But anyway, I just thought, well, maybe 19 years old, you still have it in you, So, and then I realized that after being there for a while and going to a lot of the games, I saw all the big name players at Comiskey Park and Wrigley Field, and they had double headers in those days. And you could see all these players, and I got to see Jackie Robinson and Don Newcomb and Bob Fellow and Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams. I got to see all these big name players, which I was fascinated by. And of course, then I was working for Smelters, and I had a fairly good job. But then I got to thinking, well, I know where there's fresh air, and I know where the work is good. And so we came back, and she went home and stayed with her father down in East Texas for maybe a couple of months while I got situated here, and then she came here, and then we've been here ever since. And but great experience.
And when you came back, then where did you live?
When I came back here, that's when I came back, and I lived in East Pasco, but I worked on McNair. I moved out to Hermiston, where I could be 6 miles away. Just go down and come back. And I always believed in living close to work, and so that's what I did. And then in the spring of '52, that's when I came back. Worked on the Blue Bridge, helped build that, irrigation canals out here, and then.
And did you move back to the area here too then?
Yeah, I moved back to Pasco, and I lived in Pasco then until 1955. Because when I went to work for General Electric in 1955, then you could get housing in Richland. Your name go on a list and you could get housing, and that's when I it really took off for me. It really took off for me.
And was it housing readily available then? I mean, as African American, was that?
Well, it was. if you could get GE out, you couldn't buy a house. I couldn't buy a house in Richland because I was blind, from real estate people, and that was as late as 1965. But back then it was the government homes, and if you worked, you could get a home.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it didn't matter. So it wasn't up to them then.
Right.
It was up to General Electric then.
Right.
And I rode the bus back and forth to work 10 cents a day round trip, 5 cents a day. I could walk up to the bus stop, catch a bus, and go to work. Yeah, and then in the outer area, the one construction in the outer area, they paid you isolation pay. They paid you $4 a day to go out there doing construction all the way out there. 300 area, you didn't get anything but way out there, and then the crafts got more. Interesting.
Yeah.
Those days are gone forever, though. Yeah.
So when you did go to buy a home then in Richland, did you experience some difficulty?
Oh yeah, it was tough. The guy, so he just flat told me, he said, "Of course you're black, we won't sell your house. I can't take a chance on my investment." And so then, of course, at that time there was like the NAACP and other groups wanted to come in and get involved. I said, "No, I'll take care of it myself." I said, "My kids live here. My kids got to walk down these streets. I'll take care of it myself." And so, and I just, I let it go. And then there was a gentleman by the name of Everett Green, had a real estate company. He called me up. He says, "I hear you're having problem getting a house. I'll sell you anything you want." I said, "Yeah, I know you will, because your prices eliminate me." I said, "The level of your home and what they cost." I said, "I'm just to make a weekly salary. I can't afford one of your homes." And the interesting thing about that, and I never knew I'd be in real estate. And once I got into real estate, I ended up selling Everett Green's home. Yeah, and ended up selling the home that he owned. Yeah, and he was the guy that. But it's an interesting turn. And then when where I live now, I just live on Spring down here, right down the street here. When I got first night I was there. First night I saw it, I picked up the phone rang. Some guy said, "This is the Ku Klux Klan." He said, "You're next." That was what I got on the phone. And so I just called in and reported it. But nothing ever happened after that. But that's what happened to me. So.
Right. Did you have? Were there other incidents where people opposed you sort of moving in? Or?
Well, no, but I did not heard later on from Ron Catherine when Ron Catherine bought his house. Who lives on the street? It's kind of interesting. And but I did. The place where I went, where I was turned down, was in Beverly Heights. Beverly Heights is where Fred Meyer is, and up on the hill. Right. That's the area.
Okay.
Well, later on, even years later, I went up and there's a home for sale by owner, and up there on the house. And then I knocked on the door, and when he saw it black, he just slammed the door. He says, "Go over there, there's some houses over there. You shut the Point Prefab area, that." So that, but you run into that, yeah. And then I had one person that worked with me in the laboratory. He says, "I don't have to worry about that." He says, "I don't have to worry about this." And I'm white. Said, "I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff," And it's just been an interesting. It's just been an interesting experience, real interesting experience. But what it is, I just let it roll off and keep moving. That's how you have to do it. Can't change things. Yeah.
A little bit earlier, you mentioned the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
Were there organizations, NAACP and other organizations here in the Tri-Cities?
Yeah, there's NAACP, and there's one guy by the name of McGee, and sometimes he would be kind of like a one-man walking picket. He was a real fighter and everything like that. But I wasn't as involved as a lot of people because I was working all the time. Yeah, and but I knew things was going on, and I did my share, and I. And I was involved in this. Wherever I lived, I've always been involved in the community. And I was on the planning commission, things like that, and all that stuff.
In Richland?
Yeah, oh yeah.
How long about when was that?
About 1969, 70, back in those days, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And what did you think of that experience?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. It really was. But I made the motion on the planning commission as to put the infrastructure into Meadow Springs area, South Richland. And I went to work the next day, and out in the 300 area was a 3760 building, which they just tore down recently, the last few months. It was called a technical library. And up in the upper area, I walked in one morning. There was a guy named Guthrie, Guhtrie, named Guthrie. I don't know what his first name now was, but anyway, he was kind of a loud guy in the community. But anyway, he cornered me and he said about all the what it was going to be, paying the taxes, what it's going to cost, and all that. And I said, well, I don't know who you are, but my philosophy is that if you're going to have a good community, you got to make it a good community, and it's going to be no better than the people that live in it. And that's, and that's the way I left it. And then he got on the city council for a while, and he was kind of a different guy, but he really didn't. Pretty soon, he just kind of faded away. And I don't know where he is now. And he was the same way, because when I was at the lab, I was in charge of employee benefits. Had some responsibilities there, and he was a little different there too, because he just wanted you to give him the money, and he'd buy his own, did his own benefits. He wasn't interested in regular, benefits like everyone else. Mm-hmm. But you get some of that. Yeah. Learned a lot.
So I know at some point you got into officiating.
Yeah, in 1964. Well, a little earlier than that, they wanted me to get into officiating, but I was going to night school. I was trying to get finished up. And there was a gentleman, they said, well, they had no African-American people in officiating sports, here. And the guy that came to me was working as a as a garbage pickup person in Richland. The garbage pickup person. His name was Johnny Singleton. And there was a guy in Pasco by the name, I believe it was Jim Pruitt, big, tall, about 6'6", African-American guy. And Singleton, by him being on the garbage trucks crews, like they pick up garbage, mm-hmm. and they dumped it by hand then instead of the sophisticated stuff they got now. But anyway, they talked to him about somebody getting into sports, refereeing sports. And of course, my kid was already playing Little League here at that time. And so he thought about me and Pruitt. And so the three of us, we started out. And of course, when I got in it, because I'd been around baseball, my curve just went up. It just went like that. And I was in the Pac-8 in 2.5 years.
Don't
I didn't even know I was that good. And the first year I worked, they wanted to pick me. They picked me for the Little League playoffs, but they said we don't let first year people work in that. But there was never a year when I officiated sports that I wasn't picked for some playoffs up there.
Wow.
And then out of that, got me into American Legion, then into actually I worked pro ball before I went to that 2.5 years, a year and a half. I had been down to Kennewick working one day and one morning, and I came home about 4:00, and the phone rang, and it was a guy from the Tri-City Braves at that time, over here, the pro ball club.
Yep.
He says, "Get out here at 6:30. You got a doubleheader." So I go out there and I work doubleheader, and so the guy I was sitting in the room with, his name was Biddick. His name was Biddick. I'll never forget his last name. And he was telling me about how to do it, and he said that the catcher has to reach out a little bit. He says, just go ahead and call that a ball. He said, because the fans will get on you. I said, I don't know who you are. I said, but what I was taught is if the ball hit the strike zone in any place, whenever it hits the strike zone, it's a strike. I don't care where it goes beyond that. And I said, and that's what I'll do. They may not have me back. And there was a guy by the name of Ted Sizemore. Ted Sizemore, University of Michigan. He was a catcher. Ended up as the second baseman for the Dodgers, but he was a catcher at that time. And I worked that game, and in the Tri-City Herald the next morning, Ted Sizemore says the best balls and strikes game they'd ever had called since he had been there. And then, and I know I'm jumping way ahead, but way back in 2000, when I was inducted into the NCAA Hall of Fame in Chicago, when I got up to talk, and I was telling them I said my first game was behind a guy by the name of Ted Sizemore, and his wife happened to be in the audience. Yeah. Wow. His wife was in the audience, wow. And I didn't know it, but his wife was in the audience, and that was pretty interesting. Yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah. But then it just turned to goal. Mm-hmm. I could run, and I just enjoyed it. And I don't know why. And later in years, we call it, you got to be in the place when lightning strikes, whatever it is, you got to be when lightning strikes, that's your opportunity. But I was working, taking a half day's vacation to do work a game with Columbia Basin College. That was my second year, yeah. And the guys from the Pac-8 in those days was there watching some players. And after the game was over, one of the guys came over to the car and he says, you ever thought about coming up working in the Pac-8? And I said, well, I'd love to someday. He said, well, what I did, he said, we watched you work the bases. Your focus never left what you were doing. We watched you work the plate. Your focus was always there. And he says, well, you're really better than some of the guys we have up there. And I said, well, I'd be happy to try it. I what I know about it. I never been there before. So. But anyway, that's how I got there.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how.
And how many years did you do?
I did it for 36 years in the old Pac-8 team.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I evaluated umpires until they went to the Pac-12. I would go from here. I wouldn't go from evaluating officials. I wouldn't go to other travel, but I would just go to WSU and my wife and I until they went to Pac-12. And I thought, well, it's time for somebody else to do it. So, yeah, and I did a lot. Overall, I got 21 World Series under my belt.
Wow.
And 2 Olympic. I worked the Olympics in '84 and '88. And I worked the first games that ever, when they were demonstration sports for the Olympics. I worked balls and strikes on the first game ever in Pueblo, Colorado in '78.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was trying to go. Still getting it. I was at Yakima. I was at SeaTac this past weekend for Hall of Fame.
I saw that, the Legion.
Yeah. So it's just I've always been involved. And right now, the one guy that was in the Pac-10 with me, there was nobody taking care of like Columbia Basin College and doing that. So we incorporated, we own that, and I run it administratively. We just own that association, and I take care of that. But Hanford's been good. I mean, the Tri-Cities has been, I call it virgin territory, and for me, traveling around when I did get into human resources, well, I would travel to different schools for science and engineers, and I got into that just by the guy who was going to go to WSU, and he says they had three schedules for interviews, and they only had 2, and they says, you know how to talk about the lab, come on. So I go to WSU, and they've got 3 schedules. 2 starts at 8:30, 1 start at 9. Well, my training was sitting in with one of the other interviews for 30 minutes. That was my training. And then you're on your own. And of course, then I ended up doing all of that. And then, of course, when I was out going to different places like Purdue, Michigan, Wisconsin, down Stanford, all those places, I always picked up a local newspaper, would look at what the economy was kind of like. And for the last 60 years, the Tri-Cities has been better, and has been as good as any and better than most. I had opportunities to leave. I wouldn't leave. Good place to raise families. Good schools were good. And my wife was very active she stayed on top of things within the school boards and the city council and all that stuff. She was a real tiger there, but she always did her homework. And so we just always been involved, yeah. And I always encouraged other people to get involved, but it's hard to sometimes get them to do anything. But I always taught my kids to try things,
right?
Because you can always come back to nothing. And Art Linkletter, I heard him years ago say, if you're ever going to get any place, do anything, you got to take some chances. You got to stick your neck out. And I never forgot that. Yeah. So.
I was going to ask you. So you work construction.
Sure.
And then fuels prep.
Yeah.
Right, and then bet you human resources. Of those 3 sorts of different kinds of jobs you had at Hanford, was there one that was sort of more challenging than the others, and maybe one that was more rewarding?
One was, well, they all reward. I'll tell you, moving on to the research lab where they did examination of the fuels and radio metallurgy, where they did they studied things about what happened, why they failed, all that. That was tremendous. But the one thing that got me out to get me the exposure was human resources. And what happened there is, I went in one day and I had been doing what you call employee benefits or whatever, administration, all that stuff. And I went and asked my manager for the job. And he said, you think you can handle that job? I said, yeah, I've been doing it all the time. I said, yeah. So he said, okay, give me a chance. He gave me a chance at it. And of course, the people that was involved around it I work with, I didn't get any help there. But there happened to be a guy by the name of Bob Steichen that worked in payroll. He was in payroll at a different building. And he was a guy that coached Little League Baseball, another kids playing sports, and had a relationship with him and everything, and and I'd get some information from him. I'd consult with him once in a while. And then also there was a guy by the name of Dick Dibble, and he was an attorney, and he had been a professor over on the coast, and he was an expert in group dynamics. And when they had the civil rights movement, they wanted, you would go and talk about the civil rights things and things that happened. And during that time, I would talk about my experiences. I would, talk with groups about my experience and things like that. And then he was the guy that wanted to come on, and then I'd go and talk things like that. And he says, you know how to talk about this. Come on, we want to hear about your experience and all that stuff. And I talk about that. And then he taught me group dynamics, how to handle groups. For example, if when there's good information going, don't shut it off. If it wanes, redirect it. He taught me group dynamics, and I watched and I learned. And I always pick people's brains. I sit and I listen all the time. I'd sit and I listen, staff meetings, whatever meeting. And then when they got ready to put in the 401k program, I was doing employee benefits at that time, and then we'd go back to Columbus, and we'd have to go back to Columbus, the headquarters, and learn about things, and we'd present all these things. And then the guy that was in payroll, and then we had employee benefits, and then there was industrial relations. That was all part of human resources. Well, the guys in employment over there, they were in charge of us going around to the different groups in the lab and explaining these benefits when they were going to sign up for their 401ks. And the guy that was in charge of that was kind of a different kind of a guy. He never helped me at all. He never helped me do anything. And they brought in another lady to help us out, and she was just like high school, and they taught her everything, but they never taught me anything. So now when we get ready to go, we're doing these seminars and these presentations and everything. Well, he would do all the presentations in that. And so I told my wife, I said, I know what he's going to do is later on, he's going to put me on the spot. I knew it was coming. And so what happened was that we went to the 200 areas, and he made the presentation over the first one at 11 o'clock and then over the noon hour. And then we go to 200 West. He doesn't say anything to me about it. We get our group together, and he explained what there. And then he says, CJ's going to do this one. I did it. I was ready. When I got done, there was two questions, all. And on the way back, and we were about the 200, right where they're building a vet plant now. She looks over, she says, "Gosh, CJ," she said, "God, you did good." And she said, "That was only two questions." I didn't say anything, and I just wrote them back. But I knew he was going to put me on the spot. But I was ready. Yeah. But I was ready. And so I always got my homework done. Yeah. And that's why I stayed out there today. I was out there 10 minutes before you. I was staying that way. Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you. I'm a little worried your mic is going to get caught there.
Oh, yeah.
Put your arm on the other
side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. There you go.
Yeah, above the cord. There we go. I just want to make sure it doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's been a great thing, And another thing is that when my oldest son, when my son now just a judge. Well, when he got out of Washington State and he was going to law school and he was going, could pass the bar and all that. And one of the guys in my office there, one of the guys, the payroll guys there, was talking about how tough it was to pass the bar and all of that. And we had a guy at Battelle in contracts that never did pass the bar, and he was in our contracts, and he was telling about how what he was telling me really did. Oh, he's probably never going to pass the bar and that kind of stuff. I didn't worry about that. And then when our oldest son went to the Air Force Academy, and he went to Air Force Academy, but my wife was on top of everything all the time. And one of the girls that the girl Ann Roseberry down at the library, you know who she is?
Yeah.
Well, she was a classmate of my oldest son, and so her dad was a liaison for the Air Force Academy. And he asked her after school one afternoon, who were some of the young boys down there would be worthy of, maybe recommending for the academy. And Duke was one of those guys. And he did. And then Greg, my second son, he went to Naval Academy, and he went to the Naval Academy prep school, but he didn't like it back there, and he came back. Went to CBC for a couple of weeks, and came home one day and threw his books away. Told his mom and mother, he said, "I'm not going back." He left, and he'd gone for about 3 weeks, and he called up one day, and she said, "Where are you?" He said, "I'm at the University of Puget Sound." He'd gone over, walked on, got him a scholarship, and she said, "What made you go over there?" He said, "I looked at the schedule, and I saw they were going to Hawaii next year." And so he went over there, and one of his friends, Carrie Randall from Richland, was over there too, So he went on. So he had a chance to go there. Yeah. And then my third son, who's a fireman in Seattle, he went to Washington State University when he could play. He could play baseball or football or basketball. But that was when kids was anti-everything. He was going to tell them how to run the program when he got over there. So they just told him to get lost. They just told him to get lost, but he's doing well in Seattle, doing really well. So, but anyway, and then my daughter, who was a sweetheart, and then Cameron, the one that was Cameron, the judge, was a high school All-American in football and baseball. He was a first-team All-American in football. And and he still doesn't say much. He never did. He never did say much. But one thing I learned from kids is that we create most of our problems. For example, my uncle had lived here, the first one here, we went to East Pasco there. We went over one afternoon, and we were right about Road 68, where Road 68 is now, coming home. And Richland and Pasco was playing one of these big rival games. And they wanted to buy hamburgers on the way home. And I said, we're not going to buy hamburgers. We don't have any money. All you guys want to do is eat. We don't have any money to buy hamburgers. Well, I get home, and I'm probably there 10 minutes. I'm walking through the house. You guys got to get ready. We got in the ball game. If you don't go, leave you here. So he turned to his mother. He says, "I don't understand." He says, "Dad says we don't have money. We don't have money to buy hamburgers." He said, "But we go into the basketball game." He said, "It takes money. He'll buy us anything we want once we get there." So if he'd never said that, I'd have never heard that. But it just tells you to be careful what you say. You create a lot of your own problems. Yeah. And I learned that. I observed that. And I paid attention to that. And I also thought he was always on honor roll. And I want to know. I told my wife. I says, I said, "Well, God, he's always on honor roll." I said, "I don't see him studying anything. I'm doing this. I'm wondering if he's cheating." So she told him about it. He said, "No." He said, "No, I study when I go to bed at night." He said, "When I go to my room at night," he said, "I study." And he was the same way. He was the same way all the way through. And when he got out of, and he was a Pac-10, academic Pac-10 guy, but when he got out of school, Buffalo wanted to come back and run back to punts, and so he wouldn't. He said, "I'm not that big," so he went to law school. And he was the same way there. He just study hard, and all the time. He always did. And so here he is,
Yeah.
So, but it's just been it's been a different road, all different, but very good. And my youngest son, Robin, has got potential, I think, to make more money than all of them put together. If he can get it all together. I think he's got potential to make more than all of them put together. Because his mind, the way he does things and how he can put it together. Yeah. And where the others are just completely different. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a couple more questions
Sure.
about your work at Hanford. First of all, did you have to, when you're working out there, do you have to have special security clearance?
Yes, you do. You have to have security clearance, yeah. And it was very secret. All the time secret. You just didn't talk about what you did. But you had to have security clearance all the time, yeah. And then you always security clearance. Also, during the early years in the laboratory, you had what they call those. They had some pencils. They were the ones that could detect radiation, that kind of thing. Yeah. Very interesting work, and actually for me, very good work. Looking back at it and how you had to go. But that brake thing made me soft. I'd never heard of a brake. I'll tell you, that was something else. I got so soft I couldn't, God, that was the worst. Physically.
Yeah. I was asking you also about President Kennedy came in 1963.
Yeah, we went
dedicated
there.
Yen reactor. I was asking you about
Yeah,
that.
you bet. We took my whole family to that. I had some 35 millimeter slides for a long time. I think still got them around someplace when he came during that time. That was a great experience. Yeah.
Do you have any specific memories of what the day was like? Or
Yeah, it was very hot. It was very hot, and a lot of people went out, and a lot of people had car problems out there on that day. And what they did to get us out there, to make room, they had taken the graders and pushed back a lot of the sagebrush and stuff so a lot of people could get out there. It was a great thing. They came in by helicopter over from Moses Lake, and that was a really interesting day. Yeah.
But you certainly, have been in the Tri-Cities a long time and
sure.
seen a lot of change. I wonder what some of the changes you've seen.
Well, the changes I've seen is in, the racial situation has changed a lot. Of course, you're never going to completely get rid of that. But it's changed a lot, because I know there are times when, you couldn't do things. They tell the stories about Kennebec. I don't know all about those things like that. But I know with the troubles that I had. But in other words, one of the things that really was tough, my uncles that lived in East Pasco, the citizens over there. Mm-hmm. Well, before I moved to Richland, we had a group called the East Pasco Improvement Association, where we would clean up vacant lots and trash and try to get things cleaned up on our own. The streets were not paved, but my uncles and after I moved to Richland, they would go to city council and they would just get completely ignored there, and they were trying to get sewer, get sewer and pavement and things like that over there. And then the people used to live in Pasco, as you go on the underpath, all to the right and to the left. They lived all to the right, all the way down to A Street. They lived all the way that. And then the city commercially pushed those people all the way from the railroad tracks all the way out to right where Kirchman Park is now.
Oh, okay.
They pushed those people all the way back out there. And all the way through, they had people all the way down in there. There were people lived in there. And so they pushed them out of there and pushed them back on further out. And that. But they went through a hard time on that, trying to get their water and sewer and getting the streets and all that paved and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, as far as the schools were concerned in Richland, my kids didn't have a lot of trouble, but the schools were excellent. Mm-hmm. But what happened is, my wife she always went to PTAs. She stayed involved. We got them into Scouts, Little League programs, all organized stuff, and so they had a chance to, to participate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And we also, when I first came to Richland, you had to fill out an application and tell what religion are you. Mm-hmm. When I put down Protestant, well, in about a day and a half, the people from Richland Baptist Church is right down here on GW Way. Mm-hmm. And my kids grew up in that church. And that's the Southern Baptist Church, which they were not racially happy to have you there. But you know what? They treated us good there. We went there. We learned a lot of things you learn there. A lot of things were different. As the kids got older, people kind of thought maybe my son wanted to marry some of their daughters or something. But anyway, I learned a lot there, and I went there and everything, and it turned out good for us, because I wanted the kids to be able to participate where they live. I didn't want to drive back to East Pasco every Sunday or something. As soon as I get out of school, I run there. No, I want them to participate where we are and where we live, and that turned out good in that way. And we lived down at 100 Craig Hill when we first moved to town, and then we moved to a 612 Newcomer. Yeah, that was right after I couldn't buy the house, and I ended up at Newcomer, ended up there, and then we could walk. They hadn't had that development down where Safeway and all that is. That we used to walk down, and kids walk across that field to church right there. And so I want to be able to go to church and and participate with the people they go to school and they see every day.
After you moved in, you got your house in Richland. Did you see Richland start to open up a little bit more? See more African?
Well, yeah, it did open up a little bit, especially. Well, when the government opened. Well, I was one of the. I think there's a guy named Fred Baker and Fred Clardy when I moved, maybe. But anyway, because other people moved to Richland. Mr. Wallace did. Mr. Rockamore moved there. The Burdens moved there because they got jobs. And then as things developed in long about 65, and when I bought my house in 76 down here, then the Burdens bought a house, then some other people bought the Brown, CW, and those guys, they bought homes and that. And CW and Norris Brown, in fact, they were from my hometown. And their dad and my dad worked on the Texas Pacific Railroad together. And that time when we moved to Hermiston out in 51 to work on McNairy Dam, well, that dad worked over there too. Well, they went to middle school over there. Well, when the middle schools came over here to play these guys, those guys just literally tore them apart. And so when Mr. Brown moved back and they started working here, well, they got a job for Mr. Brown so those kids could go to school over here and play basketball. And they also were in the trailer court. They lived in the trailer court, the Brown boys did, and they went to John Ball School. There was a little elementary school up here called John Ball, and that's where they went to school, elementary school. Then from there they moved to Hermiston, played, and then they come back, and then they went to Richland High and all of that. Yeah, that's how we all got back over here. We moved around where the work was. And so it turned out that they've done well, and so I think we've done well, considering the opportunities, you just move ahead, you can't change things, so you have to make the best of what it is, and that's what we try to do.
So overall, how was Hanford as a place to work for you?
Well, for me, it was all right. Of course, construction, guys, I just do my job, I didn't get involved in talking about what the government was doing, all that kind of stuff. I didn't worry about the politics. I just did my job, and I tried to learn as much as I could learn. And I always paid attention to what's going on, what they're doing, and how they're doing it, and everything. And I always, just paid attention. That's what I tried to do. Yeah.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you think would be important to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
What now? Anything?
Is there anything that I haven't asked you about yet?
Let's see.
Yeah.
No, just no. I don't think so. I think okay. And if you think of something, you can always call me something. I know. But anyway, it's just. Well, I've gone through all of it, and I didn't see any blood at the end. and I think people know when I walk down the street, I think people are not going to bother me. In fact, speaking of that, I coached baseball. I didn't coach Little League, but I coached the next one they called Pony League, 13, 14, all the way up through Legion, American Legion. And I coached that. I was very successful at it. And what I would do is, when I would work games at Washington State or wherever I was, at night I'd make notes of what happened, what they did, how they did, and in what situations they did that. And then when I coached, I had winning teams here. Turned out everybody wanted to play for me. I took them to California and to state tournament, which they hadn't been before. And so it got so that if I wanted to go for a walk, I had to go down by the river. If I'm walking down the street, Mr. You need a ride? No, I'm fine. Pretty soon, you need a ride, Mr. Mitchell? That's a good feeling to be able to, walk and people want to stop and give you a ride. Yeah, that's a good feeling. Yeah. So you just never know. You just do the best you can, do what you know to do, and do it right. Yeah. Yeah. And I never felt like holding grudges or anything like that. Don't have time. I don't have time for that. I had to get it done. The one thing I would never make a social worker too good. The reason being is that nobody ever gave me anything. I mean anything. And for those people that can't work, they can babysit or do something for those that can work. And I know that people, if they have to, they can. And I was going to see the other day, my wife and I, there was people picking apples. Saturday morning, it was cold. Sunday, they were picking apples. As long as there's work, you can go do it. I just think that, you nobody have to give you anything. You got health and strength. You can go work. You can go do stuff. Just get out of your way and give you opportunity and make it out there and go get it. And the thing about we have to bring people from Mexico in to do all of our work and harvest all our crops. You got to do it because we don't want to do it. I guess Americans don't like to work in the field. Do that strenuous work. And the other thing is, Dr. Bauman, if we could get people to officiate sports, and I don't care what sport it is, we could solve all of the employment problems. Kids keep coming. There's no downsizing. The least you're going to make in any kind of a youth sport like AAU or middle school basketball is about 2 to 3 times minimum wage per hour. You're going to make somewhere between $20 and $30 an hour. Just officiating basic sports.